Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm dear darling. I should see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhollow today, where we'll be relaxing as per usual. What should we talk about today? I don't really know. I don't have anything particularly planned. Just had like an enchilada, I suppose, for dinner, or two, I suppose. From those old El Paso packet, not packets, like meal kits, I guess. I'm sure perhaps if you're Mexican, you might be rolling, not I was going to say rolling in your grave. That kind of insinuates your demise, which is not really what I meant. You're kind of like rolling in your bed right now, being like, old El Paso, that's not proper Mexican food. And no, it probably isn't, but I still eat it. Good evening, everyone. Right now in Fawnhallow, it's 8:25 p.m. on Monday, July 10th, 2023. This isn't, and I know we're talking about food twice in a row, this is the sort of thing which I go back and forth about, I suppose, because, obviously, it'll be sort of like ready meal kits. I don't expect them to be the same as the actual food. I'm sure the actual food from the actual cuisine country made by people whose cuisine is whose culture is that cuisine originates from, could make it a million times better. But I also do have an appreciation, I suppose, for these kits, I suppose, at the same time, for giving a much more accessible way to interface with, I suppose, other cuisines at the same time. Like, I always think about, it's sort of like tangentially related, but sorry, no treasure hunt. I'm getting into the role of conversation. But I always think back to this video. I can't remember, it must have been like a BuzzFeed video or something I saw at some point, where it was basically like, a load of Chinese people taste like Panda Express, which, as I understand it, is basically some sort of chain Chinese restaurant or something in America. And they asked a load of different generation people from China to do it, and there was a clear divide between the first generation of Chinese people, of Chinese children, I suppose, of Chinese immigrants who came to America, versus the actual immigrants and / your parents and grandparents themselves, like first or second generation versus the actual initial immigrants themselves. And how most of the kids are just like, this is nothing like the actual Chinese food. This is horrible. It's too sweet, too salty, etc., etc., etc. Well, most of the grandparents, who are born and raised in China, which is it's not bad. It's not exactly the same sort of thing, but it still tastes quite nice and it's not too far off. I always think about that, because certainly, when I watched it, I was probably I'm going to guess I was sort of teenage age, and certainly I don't remember my exact opinions, but I can certainly see myself being the sort of person being there's no point in these Chinese takeout foods, and if you don't know, I'm Chinese, by the way, or these Chinese takeaways, because there's such a facsimile, I suppose, of what actual Chinese food tastes like. And to a certain extent, I guess I am right. It's not like I expect to turn up to, whatever Chinese restaurant, I suppose, in Britain and just be whoa, it's exactly the same as it is in China, There's certainly a marked difference, not only through the ingredients you can buy here, but the way they're prepared to appeal to a much more local palate, and then, what's popular and what's not, etc., etc. But also at the same time, I feel that's, not kind of a point. As long as people aren't, I suppose, out here being this is exactly what they eat in China or whatever, this is exactly what the cuisine tastes like. I don't think most people are like that. I feel you got to give people some credit. I think most people are kind of oh yeah, this is probably not exactly what they eat in China, but it's it's still a step into the right direction of tasting these foods in the first place. And also, oftentimes a lot of these takeaways, I suppose, are even run by Chinese people themselves. Even if they do change the recipes or whatever to appeal it to a different audience, it's still got the same sort of core heart. And even if it's not made by necessarily a Chinese person, it still can be tasty, can't it? And it can still be quite relatively accurate. I suppose it's kind of more of a dependent on where you eat basis. But anything, I suppose, which sort of extends our olive branch out to, connecting cuisines, cultures, and across the invisible river of, I suppose, cultural divide is good in my books, I say. Obviously, perhaps that's a bit too of an idealistic view or viewpoint or opinion on these sort of things, where, perhaps I'm giving people too much credit with thinking that, oh yeah, this is not obviously an exact copy or replica, it's just meant to be a sort of adjacency to it. But yeah, I don't know, I always think back to that video, it's certainly one of them which I'm sure had not a massive impact on my life, but a small enough impact on my life to make me reflect on my own opinions and that sort of thing. You know, I've had Chinese takeaways and I've had, you know, proper Chinese food. I've been to China multiple times and, you know, what I suppose you would call legitimate Chinese food. And honestly, you know, while Chinese takeaway is not my favourite thing, I still find it fine, you know. A lot of the times I still think they do a pretty good job of, you know, if basically like my British friends or whatever were just like, oh, you know, I really love Chinese food, you know, have you had XYZ, or, you know, I've had this I always have this on like my local Chinese takeaway, you know, I suppose my initial reaction could be one of like indifference or arrogance, I suppose, being like how, or, you know, like defensiveness, and would be like, that's not actual, you know, Chinese food, how dare you even like try and play it off as such. Or, you know, I can take it from the sense that this is just only their experience, and, you know, it can be something which I can enlighten them further, being like, whoa, maybe you should try this or X, A, B, C instead, not instead as well, because maybe you like that because you like this, and then, you know, it becomes a sort of bridge which can be formed rather than a gulf which becomes widened. Of course, you know, again, this is all from a very idealistic viewpoint. You know, I'm talking about like my friends here rather than talking about someone who might not necessarily be doing things in good faith or good interests, you know, whether it be through ignorance or not. But it's just sort of like basically, the long and short of it is that I just think about that BuzzFeed video quite a lot. You know? It's just sort of like a, you know, give things a chance, you know? Things aren't always necessarily perfect. Like, I remember, I was talking to one of my friends, like, this is ages ago, but he was telling me the fact that, you know, I can't remember, we were talking about, like stir fry, like a chow fan or chow mein or something, or chow mein, as you might know in a more anglicised form. And then how he was like, oh yeah, I don't know, make it sometimes. You can get like these stir fry, like not packets, but like pre-made stir fry kits or whatever from like Waitrose or something. And I was just like, I've never even heard of that before. You know, like every time I've made it, I've always just like bought vegetables and just like chopped it up or whatever, then like tossed it into a pan or a wok, and, you know, that's it. And, you know, I suppose very easily my initial reaction could be like, you know, you should try making it properly if you want to even call that like stir fry or whatever, Chinese stir fry. But also, on the other hand, you know, not everyone's, you know, I've been born and raised, I suppose, not knowing how to cook Chinese cuisine, but I've had a lot more experience with that, I suppose, in interfacing with it than like other people. Like, you can't expect every single person out there to be like, okay, you know, I want to learn how to make a Chinese stir fry, I got to go find like a Chinese chef to teach me or something. That's outrageous. It's not, obviously that's not only going to be expensive for some people, but it's also not feasible for some people. Like, how do you go about doing that in the first place? You know, just make Chinese friends, you say, but it's like, okay, well, what are you going to do? You're going to go to like a Chinese convention or something? You're going to go to China? I guess so, you could, but, you know, again, those are not always the most feasible options. So having something which people can interface with in that sense is cool, I think. So that's, you know, that's me flipping it on my head, I suppose, like trying to see it from a perspective which would be much more relevant, I suppose, to me. So circling back to these old El Paso dishes, I wonder if, you know, Mexican people think the same. You know, I'm of course not going to be like, well, you know, these old El Paso enchiladas, exactly what they must taste like in Mexico. I'm sure in Mexico they're like a million times better or whatever, but you know, upon some reflection, is it the same sort of thing where it's just like, oh, you know, maybe it's like, now that I've got this experience of enchiladas, I'm just like, you know, maybe I'm more willing to try to go to like a Mexican restaurant, which is actually run by like a Mexican mum and pop family or something. And, you know, I try the food and be like, I order enchilada, and then, you know, I try it and I'm like, well, this is so much better. And maybe that encourages me to go to Mexico and, you know, learn more about the culture and cuisine and that sort of thing, you know? As I say, olive branch over the cultural divide, I suppose, in the first place. Anything which not necessarily closes the gap, because I suppose inevitably there always will be some sort of gap, but makes it easier to like walk across then, you know. It brings people together, I suppose, is what I mean to say, is probably for the better, right? Rather than worse. Again, very idealistic viewpoint. Ooh, I wish everyone could just get along and like live in harmony and that sort of thing, but you know what I mean, right? So, yeah, I don't know, I think about that because, you know, sometimes I buy these old El Paso kits and I'm like, oh, you know, maybe I should just like learn to properly make like these cuisines or dishes like properly or whatever, like learn what spices go into it. And yeah, honestly, that would probably be the best thing, but also that does require effort in the first place, I suppose. It's like, you know, reflecting back, and it's so much easier, I suppose, for me to talk about it from someone else's perspective about Chinese cuisine, I suppose, because it's something I'm more familiar with. But, you know, I'm just like, I'm trying to imagine someone like, oh, how would you make like char siu, I've always known as cha sha roll, using Mandarin dialect, I suppose. You know, You know, you're gonna have to like do a lot of research. You're gonna have to find it. You're gonna even locate it, because it's not like that sort of sauce is something which is not all the time just sold in supermarkets. You might have to go to a Chinese supermarket. You might have to go find that, and then you're gonna have to like navigate all the aisles in the Chinese supermarket, which is, you know, obviously made and for people who are Chinese or who can understand Chinese, and, you know, try and find exactly what you want, etc., etc. You know, I'm just saying, you know, the cost of entry for these sort of kits is significantly lower than doing it from scratch for yourself, and I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. It's like anti-gatekeeping. It's like opening the gate a little bit so other people can interface with it, which is always good, I think. Well, maybe not always good, but in a lot of these, in this sort of scenario, I think it's good, isn't it? Anyway, so these meal kits in general, I don't know, because I'm sure there's, you know, some meal kits out there which are not necessarily in good faith, but I can't imagine there's many meal kits out there which are trying to play off as, well, okay, maybe that's not necessarily true. I think I was going to be like, there's not many meal kits out there playing themselves off as like, oh, 100% accurate to the exact cuisine, because it's, well, they probably all are trying to do that, because it's not like you can be like, not accurate at all to actual cuisine or whatever, because, or like, or only 50% accurate to what it actually tastes like in that country. You would just be like, why would I buy that when I could buy the 100%? If anything, it's sort of just like the vicious more that is marketing claims another victim of genuine intention, which, you know, I guess is not great to be perfectly fair, but as fallible as we are human, that just sort of is the inevitability of the society that we've created. Yeah, so I don't know. I suppose if you're actually Mexican, you could probably like shed some light on it. Like, what do you think of, you know, Old El Paso? What do you think of, like, I don't know, Taco Bell, or what's that other one? Chipotle. I don't even know if we have Chipotles in UK or whatever, but like, are they good? Do you like them? Do you not? I don't know, because I still kind of like Chinese takeaway. Like, not all the time. Sometimes it kind of depends on the takeaway itself, because sometimes it's like ungodly, like salty or sweet or something, but it just kind of goes for restaurants in general, you know. Restaurants, if you don't know, use an absolute insane amount of things like salt and butter to flavour their food, because, you know, that's what gives it flavour. And a restaurant isn't particularly concerned that much about you having a balanced diet, I suppose. It's more concerned about you having a great taste and flavour profile more than anything, right? So, you know, it's not like it's going to be the most accurate thing in the first place. But yeah, anyway, I guess all of this sort of meandering about is just to be like, I kind of like Old El Paso enchiladas. Maybe at some point I should probably learn to make like enchiladas for myself, like from the ground up. You know, get the spices, get the sauces, and maybe it will be even more rewarding and even tastier in of itself. But, you know, to tell you the truth, these kits are pretty useful. Like, you know, me and my family, whenever we ever want to have roast duck, we don't cook our own like Peking duck. We just buy the pack. Why? Because it's just effort, you know. Take these shortcuts when you can, you know. Life is short, is what I mean to say. But yeah, I don't really know. Of course, this discussion here is kind of like exclusively about food. I haven't really extended this real track of thought to, you know, other things outside of just, you know, food packs, I suppose, in general. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it makes me also think of things like instant, like noodles and what have you. It's not like instant noodles are particularly meant to be a reflection of actual, you know, like handmade noodles that you find in like izakaya restaurant or something. I'm thinking of like instant ramen. No, that's what I was like, what's the word? I couldn't think of a combination of words. But at the same time, you know, those sort of things are very popular in Japan and China as well. I don't think like with Chinese and Japanese or whatever locals are eating like these instant noodles and being like, whoa, this is like an exact replica of like noodles I could make or anything like that. They're just meant to be cheap, they're meant to be easy, they're meant to be convenient, I suppose. And that sort of thing, I'd imagine, branches out to a lot of different things. Like there was this like Chinese instant noodle that I always used to have when I was younger. You know, Fang Min Mian, which is, you know, I think it's just a Chinese translation of instant noodle, but I'm not entirely sure, so don't necessarily quote me on that. And does it taste exactly the same as like Chinese noodles that I would have like in a fancy restaurant, I suppose, in China? Absolutely not. But it was still tasty. I still ate them because they're convenient, and then, you know, they're not a bad facility, I suppose, at the end of the day. I suppose it's kind of just to do with perspective and framing in the first place. Is, you know, there's very much a difference between advertising as reflective, as not reflective necessarily, but like as a mirror of a culture, or as a sort of like a creative liberty rendition of it in the first place. Or maybe not even creative liberty, it's like a rendition of it. You know, it's different. Things are different, and even more so. Because now, you know, I'm talking about Chinese food again. Like, a lot of things in Chinese food, as I say, like, a lot of, if you're trying to, like, make it in, you know, wherever you are, sometimes it's, like, straight up impossible. You know, you're like, you need one of these ingredients. And it's like, okay, well, this ingredient is not something which is sold, like, in your country or something. Or it's like, the only way I can get it is I had to order it from, like, you know, online and get it delivered to me and, like, overseas. And it's like, that's just straight up not feasible, you know. You can use your own alternatives, I suppose, right? It makes me think of cooking and baking, I suppose, when it in recipes, how a lot of the time that I can't remember where I saw this, but it was basically the idea that conversions between units from like cups and like imperial measurements that US uses to like metric ones which UK uses sometimes asterisk is pointless, because the whole point is not necessarily to get an accurate measurement, is that these measurements are scaled to what you can get. So, you know, it might be like, oh, you know, I don't know how much necessarily 500 grams of pasta is like in cups, but 500 grams in cups. Yeah, you might be like, oh, use two cups of flour or something, which I don't know if that literally is 500 cups, but, you know, that's what a quick Google showed me. 500 grams, sorry. In this recipe, because that's what it calls for in the US recipe, you know, 2 cups of flour, and you convert it to like a metric measurement, and it's like 511 grams or whatever. It's not saying use this recipe for 511 grams, because, well, yes, technically, I suppose that is what it's saying. It's the point of a recipe is it's converted to what is convenient, I suppose, for, you know, the market of who it's aimed at. You know, 2 cups is probably a very convenient amount of flour for a US citizen. It's probably like, you know, a small pack of flour, maybe it's like half a pack of like a medium pack of flour. But 511 grams is such an awkward amount for like a UK. Like for the UK, like the packets of flour are sold in like 501 kilogram. I guess you could use 500 grams then. You know, in this case, 11 grams probably won't make that much of a difference. But, you know, if you start taking different measurements, you know, what about like 700 grams? Like, what are you going to do with that? You're going to have like 300 grams left over? I guess so. But like, what else are you going to do? Rather than the much more reasonable thing is to find a UK recipe, or I suppose scale it up so it matches the sort of quantities you can find. So basically take what I just said about that, but for cuisine, and which is not local to your own country or culture, right? You know, some things, ingredients I'm sure are insanely difficult to get. You know, if it wasn't for the fact that, you know, a lot of Korean, you know, East Asian culture, I suppose, food-wise, is becoming a lot more popular, especially in the West. You know, how easy would it be to actually get kimchi, I suppose, here? You know, you'd have to go to very specifically, I suppose, in like a Korean market or something, or you'd have to make your own, and it's not like kimchi's the easiest thing to make, you know. So how are you going to make a Korean, like, dish, like kimchi fried rice? Well, you know, you just sort of out of luck until, you know, these kits come along, which probably come with, like, pre-packed kimchi. Or nowadays, I suppose, you know, you might have a local Asian mart where you probably sells kimchi and that sort of thing. I don't know. That's the sort of it, you know. I don't really know what I'm going to title this episode, nor where I'm really going with this. I don't really think there's much of a conclusion here. I just sort of guess it's more like, you know, if you have these not ready meal kits, but these like meal prep kits or something from, you know, something, and you think to yourself, oh man, it probably would have made more sense for me to actually cook this. It's like I can get the ingredients myself. Feel guilt-free, you know, cook that meal, enjoy that meal. Totally fine in my book, you know. Sure, at some point it'd be nice for you to expand your horizons, that sort of thing. But there's also a lot of things in the human life that would be nice, that we should do, but we probably don't, because life's busy and life's hard. And it's a balancing act with far too many variables to balance. So, you know, you got to pick and choose your battles, is basically what I'm trying to say. Anyway, I don't really know where I'm going with this, but hopefully that was enticing or interesting. Anyway, I'm going to round this episode off here. So if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons, and I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Twitter, Discord down below. Hope you see each other again, but for now, it's our farewell. So until next time, bye-bye for now.